Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. I am thrilled to walk you through our Tier 1 Daily Strategy Report for August 18th, 2026. Now, we aren't just skimming the surface level numbers today. We are executing a ruthless, systematic teardown of the macroeconomic indicators and the equity microstructure that are currently driving global asset pricing. So, if you manage institutional capital, grab your notepad because we are hunting for the structural shifts that require immediate, actionable portfolio adjustments. Let's get right into it.
Here's the roadmap for today. We'll start with macro sentiment, move into treasury and yield dynamics, and then dissect the equity market microstructure. After that, we'll evaluate sector risks, apply a global noise filter, and wrap the whole thing up with a definitive strategic action plan. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Macro Sentiment and Foundation, specifically focusing on the yield inflation paradox. Just look at this number, 5.32%. The 30-year Treasury yield hasn't just crept up, it has violently spiked to this level, marking its absolute highest point since 2007. And listen, this isn't just a blip on the radar. This is our yield sentinel literally screaming that the era of cheap liquidity is completely exhausted. When you have a risk-free rate sitting this high, it creates this massive gravitational pull that fundamentally fractures the valuation math for literally every other asset class in your portfolio. And this table perfectly captures the paradox we're dealing with right now. Over on the left side, consumer inflation looks like it's cooling off, right? Headline CPI at 3.4% year over year and core CPI at 2.6%. It feels like a tactical sedative, a reason to breathe easy. But we have to cross-verify that yield sentinel against the real economy. Look over at the right side. Retail sales just absolutely fell off a cliff, a negative 0.6% drop month over month, drastically missing the projected 0.1% gain. So the narrative isn't actually cooling inflation anymore, it's demand destruction. Moving right along to Section 2, Treasury and Yield Dynamics, Institutional Supply Pressures. What you're seeing here is raw, unfiltered, institutional data straight from the Treasury. It's highlighting a relentless, almost overwhelming deluge of government and corporate debt issuance. The market is seriously choking on this institutional supply right now, and it's exactly this systemic pressure that's driving the 10-year yield to its absolute highest point since early 2025. When you pair this kind of supply shock with the consumption cliff we just looked at, man, you really start to see the cracks forming in the foundation of the banking system. Which brings us to Section 3, Equity Market Microstructure, where we're looking at valuation versus velocity.
So the S&P 500 slipped down to 7,692 points today, and we really need to reconcile two completely conflicting realities here. On one hand, you've got institutional base cases, like Goldman Sachs, projecting a really optimistic year-end S&P target between 7,800 and 8,100, relying heavily on sustained earnings growth. But on the other hand, you have to square that with what actually happened today. A severe alpha decay in legacy semiconductor stocks. Micron tanked 7%, Intel dropped 6.6%, and AMD shed 4.3%. This is a massive divergence. The breadth of the market is basically flashing red, telling us that the structural foundation is incredibly, dangerously narrow.
But wait, check this out. On the flip side, the concentration risk within artificial intelligence is still hyper-accelerating. This bar chart is just wild. It shows Anthropic's unprecedented velocity. In 2025, they had a $9 billion annualized revenue run rate. By May of 2026, $47 billion. And by the end of July, they hit $65 billion. To put that into perspective, it took Google roughly 16 years from launch to hit $65 billion in revenue. It has taken Anthropic about 5. This insane velocity is exactly what's propping up the market's high end, but it creates a massive concentration risk as we head into their highly anticipated fall IPO. Now, let's pivot to Section 4, Sector Risks and Alpha, the regulatory headwind. Take a look at this quote. It's from an internal employee chat at Meta. Instagram is a drug. Lol, we're basically pushers. Yikes. That is a heavy hitter. And it's not just a PR nightmare. It is the literal foundation for a monumental 29-state lawsuit seeking up to $200 billion from Meta. They are alleging deliberate algorithmic addiction, things like infinite scrolling and constant notifications designed to hook young people. Why should you care as an investor? Because a $200 billion fine is equivalent to their entire 2025 annual revenue. This is a structural legal headwind that absolutely has to be explicitly priced in to the Magnificent Seven. Next up is Section 5, the global noise filter, isolating price makers. As quantitative strategists, our job is to ruthlessly filter out the noise. And today's news cycle, it is deafening. We've got the US imposing sanctions on the ICC president, a Michigan Senate race completely fixated on historical controversies over charity transfers, the Minnesota Attorney General suing the Texas governor over ICE agent extradition limits. Now, I want to be super clear. In this explainer, we are not taking sides on any of these deeply political and legal issues. We analyze them purely through the lens of capital allocation. These events generate intense geopolitical friction and media hype, sure. But as institutional investors, you should be explicitly discounting this noise when executing trades and keep your eyes glued to those macro fundamentals we just unpacked.
And finally, Section 6, Strategic Action Plan, Binary Portfolio Adjustments.
We're concluding this explainer with a strict, forward-looking mandate for you portfolio managers out there. You have to immediately adopt a binary posture. There's no middle ground here. Here are your two scenarios. Scenario A, if you're confident the S&P can maintain a $340 earnings per share, then you aggressively overweight AI pure plays and ride that hyper-growth wave of enterprise AI adoption we saw with Anthropic. Or, scenario B, if you believe the macro decay is real, you underweight broad tech, you initiate strict hedges against that 5.32% yield dragging everything down, and you better price in the catastrophic potential of those $200 billion regulatory fines hitting the tech giants. I want to leave you with one very provocative thought today. At what exact yield threshold does your portfolio's risk parity model fundamentally break? You need to evaluate your specific structural exposure to that 30-year yield sentinel right now. Find your breaking point before the broader market forces you into a liquidation. Thank you for joining me for today's explainer, guys. I highly encourage you to dig into your own models today and answer this critical question. See you next time.